Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Career Webcast for Salary Negotiations and Earning a Raise. Really excited to have this webcast with Blair and Kimberly. And thank you, everyone, for attending. This is such an important topic. We've done this webcast topic multiple times, and each time the resounding feedback is, wow, this is a really, really great and important thing to talk about. And I know a lot of people have been sending me questions about, is this now a good time with COVID and everything else going on? And yes, salary negotiation is always a good topic, always something important to bring up. I'm going to introduce myself really quick, and then I'll turn it over to the presenters. So I'm Yuliya Dennis, and I oversee our alumni career services at the OSU Alumni Association. And I love what I do. I love helping people. We know this is a difficult time, but there are still so many opportunities for advancement and career and salaries, etc. And I'm here to help you navigate some of those things. I'll have Kim introduce herself, and then I'll have Blair introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kimberly Ward Barowicz, which is a long way to say you can call me Kim. I am a project manager for the Critical Path Institute. It's a nonprofit and I lead projects for Parkinson's research. That's my day job. And then the fun part about my professional life is I'm also a career ambassador for Oregon State University Alumni Association. So yeah, very happy to talk about this topic. We all have been through this, and really excited to share tips on how to navigate this for your own professional development.
Hi everyone, my name is Blair Paulik. I graduated from Oregon State with a Ph.D. in environmental toxicology in 2016, and then couldn't find a job and ended up actually coming to Yuliya for career advice. And so that is how I met Yuliya, and then I have been volunteering with her ever since. So that's why I'm here today, and I love doing this work. I love working with folks in this role as an ambassador, so I'm excited to be here. I work for an environmental consulting company called Integral Consulting, and I'm based in Portland.
Thank you, Blair, so much, and thank you, Kimberly. And then we'll have Kim share her tips, and then we'll turn over to Blair for her to share her tips.
Okay, thank you. So thank you for joining today. I think this is such a hard part of the job search and kind of just being in the workforce in general. So by gathering resources and listening in today, it means that you're on the right path to building more success in your life. So just round of applause for you for joining today. Asking this question takes a lot of vulnerability, and if you've been holding off wondering, should I ask for more? Like, should I have this conversation with my employer or my prospective employer? Here's your permission. Yes, you should. You should ask, and when and how will vary for each person, and the prep work you'll need to do is critical. But we all have permission to ask for what we need, so don't let that stop you. And that's why we're here to share our tips. So our first one is to just ask. This is probably really the only get rich quick scheme that I'll ever endorse, because with just a little bit of time in preparation, especially at the beginning of a job, talking about salary and negotiating for what is the right number for you will pay off literally right off the bat. And it also sets you up for long-term success as well. So the next thing is to really assume that it's not only okay to ask, but it's expected in the hiring process. Employers plan to have this conversation with you, and you should plan to have this conversation with employers. So you may still get a no, but really that's so much better than never asking the question in the first place. To prepare to ask that question, we recommend that you do your research. So that's tip number 2. And a few inputs to this. One important one is where the job is and how much it costs to live there. So one story that I'll share today is that before moving to Seattle, I made about $14 an hour, and my rent was $400 a month. I moved to Seattle, and at my first professional job, I made $12.50 an hour, and my rent was $700 a month. So my cost of living, combined with other things, basically tripled. So a good example of, that's a really good example of not doing your research and properly aligning your salary expectations. So just don't be me 6.5 years ago. But don't worry, after coming to terms with my grim reality, I took control and accessed my resources, one of them being Oregon State University's Alumni Association and Yuliya, and her fantastic advice, and used a lot of the tips we're sharing today to recover some of that ground. So. The other important aspect is to find out what the job is and what others in that industry or role are making. So this is important to consider, especially if you're making a career change. There's a lot of questions that you should be asking to people in the field, in the job, reading industry specific materials, and that info will give you an advantage when discussing salary, because that knowledge is really powerful, and it gives you confidence in the numbers that you'll share. So that all together is your market value, and bringing your market value to the table is something that Blair is going to talk a little bit more about, or we can circle back to that at the end. Or we can have an expanded discussion on personal branding sometime in the future too, because all of that is so important to this step in your job search, or being just in your role in general. So the next tip is that just because you know that number doesn't really mean you should share that information, and you should proceed with extreme caution when you're faced with the question, what are your salary expectations? This is so common to hear early on, especially if you're talking to a recruiter. And a lot of the time, it's really just to understand where a candidate is to ensure that no one's time is wasted. But generally speaking, you really want to try to avoid answering this as best as you can until there's actually an offer on the table. So there's a lot of ways to deflect in the earlier stages. And you can do that by saying you need a little more time to learn about the role before making that determination, that it's a little early in the process and you'd like to continue to keep that conversation open. And if there's some pushback on that, ultimately just saying that this conversation will need to wait until there's an offer extended is totally okay to say. And I would recommend practicing this, because sometimes that can be hard to hold off on until an offer is really on the table. But the key to all of this, no matter how you navigate that particular aspect, is to don't tell them what you're making or what you've made in a previous role. You're negotiating an offer for the job you're going to do, not the job you've already done. And at least in Washington, it's actually prohibited. There's a House bill that prohibits all employers from seeking the wage or salary history for an applicant for employment. So I'd actually check to see if that's something that might be a law in your state, but that's one reason you really shouldn't put it on applications. Don't offer up that information, because at the very least, it's not a very strong negotiation tactic. And at the very most, it might be prohibited by the state. So this all leads to the point at which you're ready to talk numbers. You really want to have a number, or have them start with a number if possible. You can respond with a specific range, a specific number, or a range. It really depends on the person, the role, the conversation. But either way, you should know your target number and share that. And also the lowest number you're willing to accept, which you shouldn't share unless you're really out of options. And you want to be confident in those numbers. So getting your target number will take some research and reflection. And initially, I actually would challenge you to question that number. It's really easy to tell yourself a lower number than you actually do deserve, or that you actually can get. And in the end, you're always going to be your biggest advocate, and the topic of salary is no exception to that. So all of those tips will hopefully better prepare you for what's next in the asking process. And on that note, I will hand it off to Blair for her to share her tips.
Awesome. Thank you, Kim. I think that was all really useful, and I know it all resonates with me and my experiences. So I wanted to start by telling a little bit of my story. I mentioned that I graduated in 2016 and with a PhD, a technical PhD, and I think I really had been made to believe by the people in my academic department that my challenge would be figuring out, which job I wanted of the many that would be out there, not so much finding a job. But that was not what I experienced. And so 8 months later, I ended up knocking on Yuliya's door because I wasn't finding any jobs. So then when it came time to that I had an offer and then he needed to go negotiate, that did not feel intuitive at all. But luckily I had through professional societies that I was involved with and through my work with Yuliya, I had mentors who were telling me you absolutely need to negotiate. And so I started trying to figure out what that would look like. But it was not intuitive for me at all. And it was in fact really scary because at that point I had been unemployed for 8 months or something, just like taking little jobs, and you know, I didn't have health insurance, and I was just like at this really low point in my career because I thought like I got this technical PhD, I networked, I thought I had done everything well. So I remember really vividly that point where I had like worked with Yuliya, worked with my other mentors, drafted this whole plan to do my first negotiation ask, and I was like in my living room sweating and pacing and just like, what am I doing? Like, it's not intuitive at all, and it's really scary. So I wanted to share that was part of my experience. But I think two of my main points are that you should always negotiate. You should negotiate at the beginning when you're starting a new job, and then really at every point that you can after you have a position. At every point where you have like an annual review, any chance that you can, because this is something that Yuliya says, but I have started saying it when I talk about negotiation too, is that you shouldn't say no to yourself. Because it's so easy to get in your head, especially if you've, like right now, we're in a pandemic and there's a financial crisis, and it's easy to just want to feel grateful for what you have in a job offer or with a position. But like Kim said, this is part of the process. Most employers are expecting you to do this negotiation dance. And if you don't do that, you're really often just leaving money or other opportunities on the table. So for me, when I first got that job offer for my first like real job out of grad school, I did negotiate, and you know, in that case was able to, even though it felt super intimidating, was able to get my base salary up 10%. And then I negotiated again after the first year and got, you know, was successful with that again. And then I've negotiated kind of at every point along the way. And that has been really helpful to me in my career progression. And if I hadn't done that, I would be in a really different place now. And it's only been 4 years since I got my PhD. So it's kind of crazy to see how much of an impact it can have on your base salary, but also on other aspects of your professional life. One of the tips that we wanted to share also was that it's important to negotiate for other benefits. You can negotiate your base salary, and that's the thing you should prioritize, but you can also negotiate other benefits. So for instance, at both of my jobs my new jobs when I've been starting out that I've gotten after grad school, I've been negotiated for a cell phone, like a work cell phone, which for me really helps me keep my distinction between work and home life, my work-life balance. If people aren't calling or texting or anything, emailing my personal cell phone for work, I can just leave that work phone at home if I'm not working. I also recently negotiated a 6-month leave of absence to do a hike. I wasn't able to do it because of the pandemic, but that was a big moment for me in negotiation, to think that an employer would actually be open to something like that. So you just never know. And again, if you're not taking those opportunities to have those conversations, then you're saying no to yourself and leaving potential things that could really improve your quality of life on the table. I mentioned pay raises going forward. So it's definitely probably most important to negotiate your starting salary at a new company, because that's what everything is going to be based on. But if you're not getting what you want out at the gate, or if you finish the negotiation and you're not totally satisfied, I think it's really important also to ask those questions up front, but then also to continue to bring up the ability for you to continue to increase your pay throughout at each checkpoint, like if it's at annual reviews or going along through the process and your tenure with an organization or a company. A few other points that we wanted to share were be willing to walk away. This can be a hard one depending on what's going on for you in your life, but I think Kim mentioned this too, that you do want to think about before you go into that conversation, like what is my lower level, or what's the least that I would be happy with, or what would make me walk away. And then I also think that it's important to share your enthusiasm for the position and to make an important part of this conversation focused on what you're bringing to the company, why you're a good fit, all of the positives that are going on, so that it doesn't feel so much just like this cold business discussion. But I also think it's important to remember that this is business and we're not doing these jobs as volunteers. And so sometimes it can be intimidating or feel like you're like too focused on the number, but I get frustrated when I hear that, because it's like, no, we're here, we're doing work because in part we need money and salary, and that's not anything to be ashamed of. So for me, something that's helpful with that is to have like to practice these conversations, practice before you're actually making a pitch, especially if it's going to be in person or even on the phone. And to practice with little key phrases. Like I remember one that Yuliya shared with me early on when I was like first starting to negotiate was, I want to make sure that I'm doing my due diligence and getting the compensation that is appropriate for the work that I'm doing. And so if you like have phrases like that you practice, where you can set the stage, like, hey, this is us having a business conversation to make sure that I'm appropriately compensated for the work that I do, I feel like it puts it in that context, and hopefully most potential employer or current employers should be receptive to that. So we can move on to the next step if we're ready for that. But those are some tips and lessons learned from my experiences.
That's great. Thank you both so much. That was a really great intro. And just to reiterate the point, and I think pretty much everyone who's ever talked to me about salaries knows that I will make it so that you will feel like you have to negotiate. I think Kim and Blair can say that that's true. So just to make sure that all of our attendees really for sure know that, yes, you do have to negotiate. And I also bring this up because about 50% of the questions that we got submitted, which we'll go through, and please do ask Q&A questions as well. We're going to do a lot of popcorn style question answer with Blair and Kim, but most people were saying something along the lines of, many are grateful to have a job in this uncertain job market. How do you even negotiate? Is it even a good time to negotiate? Yes, do negotiate. Okay, so here's my spiel. So one of the things is, so I did some research from this woman who wrote a book on Women Don't Ask, Linda Babcock, and she said only 7% of women negotiate their first salary compared to 57% of men. And she said those who negotiate get an average of 7% increase. I will say it's anywhere between 7, 10 to 15% is the average that I see with the people that I help, that I've worked with on negotiation. The other thing is, this is from a Stanford professor, Margaret A. Neal. She says, if you and your counterpart, if you and the other person who negotiate are treated identically by the company, and let's say you negotiate and they don't, 35 years later, you who didn't negotiate will have to work 8 more full years to have the same amount of wealth as your counterpart, 8 full years. So the answer is negotiate. If that's all you take away, that's all. And then, so someone had asked about, what if a job application does ask you about salary expectations? And we had a lot of questions about, where do I find, what's a good salary? How do I give that initial number? I'll have Blair answer and then Kim answer after.
Sure. I think that the answer to that question really varies based on your discipline. I have a PhD in environmental toxicology, which is I'm really narrowly qualified, at least on paper. That was something that I sort of learned the hard way when I was talking to Yuliya and doing those first negotiations and trying to find a job really ultimately. And that plays into the availability of jobs, but also the availability of data on what is an appropriate salary and where I fit in to the salary continuum with my experience and degree. And so it can be hard if you have a really specific role or specific education like I do. I do try to do as much research as I can before I negotiate. And so that usually for me looks like putting together a lot of different data points, a lot of different lines of evidence. I'm a scientist. And so that can be like Glassdoor or pay scale, and trying to get as close as I can to my profession. So for me, maybe it's an environmental scientist or a toxicologist, and trying to like triangulate to, okay, I think that this is appropriate for me based on all of these different things. And then also, this is, I think, also where the power of a strong network comes in. And so for me, one of the most powerful things has been having people in my network at various different points in their career who I can be close enough with to ask. And I think that that's changing a little bit in society. I think that people are, in my experience at least, becoming more open to talking about numbers and salary. It can be awkward. I just on Sunday went on a hike with a new coworker, and she's at the same title as me at my new company that I've only been at for 8 months. And the topic came up and we danced around it and we didn't actually talk about it, but we did agree that we would be willing to share at some point if it was useful to the other one. So I think just like trying to have those awkward conversations with people who you know who are in your field is one of the best ways, because then you can get real information about what other people are making.
Yeah, I think that that's great. I think I'll come from it from I mean, it really is going to come down to research. And I think that you can ask questions to a lot of different people. And one group of people that I wouldn't hesitate to ask is the prospective employer. And you can ask the recruiter, you can ask the hiring manager. A lot of the times they'll have a range that they're maybe willing to share. It might be posted. Don't be afraid to ask that question if it's not publicly available already. The other thing is, I think knowing your, I think what was difficult for me at a certain point was going into a new industry, a new career, doing a career pivot, and really valuing the skills that I could bring to a company, even in a new industry, in a new role. So ultimately, when a company is hiring for any position, they have a problem that they need to solve. So however you can communicate that you're the best person to help solve that problem is going to help you identify what skills that you can bring to the table that are and kind of monetize them as a commodity. I mean, really, like, you're selling your value that you can add to the company. So how do you market yourself? What sort of skills can you bring that are that you can then kind of do some research on and translate that into an actual number? So it does take some research, some honest reflection, but and we're happy to help with that too.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, very, very good perspectives. And I'm gonna, so this webcast is being recorded, and afterwards, whenever the recording's ready, I will be sending this out to all the people who registered and who attended. I'm gonna drop in there a conversation template, which I know Blair and Kim both got from me, a little paragraph thing that you can just input your information. And then what I typically advise people is that you find something like what Blair said, Glassdoor, and then find the average salary for your area and your position. And then you add about 10, 20% above that to ask. And your goal is to make that average. The average is a really great starting point for your salary as far as the actual number that you get. And then we had a bunch of questions submitted. One is based on the academic job search, and I can go ahead and answer that just because I don't think Blair and Kim have experience with academic job searches in particular. So they said, is it true that for academic jobs in general, salaries are already preset and there's not much to negotiate? For example, what would be some specific tips for academic positions such as assistant professor? So all positions can be negotiated. Things like classified positions, those do typically have a very restricted scale. If you're dealing with an academic position, such as assistant professor or a classified, reach out to me and I can help you narrow down, because I have been working in this field for quite a while and can help you negotiate some of that. But yes, always you can negotiate. Typically for professor positions, you can negotiate as well. And then this one is for Kim and Blair. What are some typical deflections from employers when raises are brought up, and what tactics do you have to get around that? And then the other thing too is keeping in mind, we did get a lot of questions about how do you negotiate within a position. I know Blair and Kim, you both have done that. So let's kind of tie that. How do employers deflect, and how do you negotiate within your current position? We'll do Kim first and then Blair.
Yeah, I think some tips that I could share on that is really timing it right. I think that if you're at that point where you're feeling like you want to ask your employer in your current role, there's usually something that prompts that. Maybe you're taking on a lot more responsibility that your job description maybe doesn't cover. And so maybe it's time to examine that. But the timing is sometimes can be hard to get it right, but I don't know. I don't think you should necessarily wait for when you normally have a review process, because those decisions sometimes are already made earlier on when budgets are determined and that kind of thing. So there really isn't a perfect time, but asking at a certain milestone in your employee life cycle isn't necessarily something you feel like you need to stick to. So doing that, having that understanding of sort of the business side behind how salaries are set and how bonuses are given out or raises are given out would be a helpful input to that process. I think a lot of deflections from employers do come from that, oh, there's just no money for that right now. So arming yourself with that information prior to the conversation, I think would be a helpful start.
In my experience, there's a lot of different ways this can go. And also in my experience, it's, I think, even harder. I don't know, they're both hard. I had talked before about how difficult it was coming from unemployment or employment way below where I should have been at that time to my first job, and how scary that was to negotiate. But it's a different beast when you're already in the company and you're negotiating with people who you work with every day. Both of the companies that I've worked at are relatively small. And so maybe you're negotiating with, like I said, people who you work with on projects day in, day out. I had an experience at one of the companies I've worked at where there was sort of this non-hierarchical structure, and the annual review process was supposed to be really focused on goals and almost kind of feelings based. And so it almost felt like it was intentionally decoupled from anything related to your salary or like the nuts and bolts of your actual benefits. And that made it really hard to break through from that conversation to like, okay, where's the spot where I can actually negotiate? I think it would be easier if that was built into the process, and maybe it is in some cases, but I've never really experienced that. So I think one of the things that happened to me was that I felt like there was sort of an implicit deflection of even opening the door to that conversation by the process not really having a spot for that. So I had to figure out a way to bring it up. And then I was met with like, oh, well, we don't really do that, or that's not really part of the process. And so I really had to come to that part of the negotiation with my research done and feeling confident and comfortable that this was something that I still should push forward on. And then I ended up having to sort of go around the normal process and make a meeting with, in that case, the COO, which also was intimidating. But I'll share this story because it was kind of just a wild moment for me in this whole process. So I did that. I went around the normal like coaching process and made a meeting with the COO, came to that meeting prepared. In that case, I was sort of unique in the company. And I think I learned through that process that they didn't really know everything about my education and my background. And so we had some conversation in which she was asking me specifics about my experience, and I was sharing more about what I did in my PhD. And she sort of was like, oh, okay, I didn't realize that. So that was an opportunity for me to make that case. And then that was successful. I got that raise that I was asking for. And then a year later, I wasn't planning to negotiate at that annual review. I thought, whatever, but I wasn't planning to. And that same COO a year later now called me one day and said like, hey, can we talk about your salary for this annual review process, your raise? And that super caught me off guard. And I wasn't prepared because I hadn't done research, because I wasn't like thinking I was going to go in and negotiate really hard like I had before, because I had gotten this raise the year before. And then the COO, when we had that conversation, literally opened that conversation with, hey, like, I know you're coming up on your annual review. I know that there's, you're expecting a raise. And I know that you're someone who really cares about the number. So what are you expecting? We don't want you to be disappointed. And I was just so blown away, because it was like a year and a half before that no one would hire me. And so it was just crazy to see that like having advocated for myself during my first annual review, came back around during my second annual review with the COO coming to me and saying like, hey, how can we please you and make sure that you have what you need? And it worked. I threw out another 10% raise because I didn't know what else to say. I hadn't done my research. I was like, 10%? And she was like, we can do that. So, which is just wild. So that was just a really powerful moment for me, and like illustrating how important it is to negotiate and how it really does have ripple effects in your career.
I love that. So my go-to is if when in doubt, 10%. Just straight. Please and thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've had a lot of really great questions come up, and I'll go through some of them. So one is, well, actually a couple that came up for through the registration form was about asking mid-job. And one piece of advice that I have for people is do a one-page summary of accomplishments that you did the last year or the last 6 months or whatever it is. And if you've been in a position for 6 months, it is perfectly okay to ask for a raise, because most companies, it'll take a while for them to get approved. But you do a one-page accomplishment summary to advocate, and then you say something like 10%, 15%, whatever it is that you want to ask for. One person had asked, they said they're now watching their son, a young child, which is very common these days to be watching. And so they're saying they're looking at childcare options and they're not able to find ones that are affordable. So they want to ask for a salary increase based on childcare costs. So this is a really big thing. And I'm going to go ahead and answer that just because I've seen a lot of people with this kind of situation. So I'm going to be super clear. So salary has nothing to do with you, cost of living, your children, your health, anything personal. So work is a business exchange. And so in this case, I would recommend you reach out to me. I think if your job is not paying for that and you ask for that increase based on your accomplishment summary, based on 10, 15, 20% increase. And if they can't do that, then yeah, looking for a new job might be the best option. I've had to actually do that in the past, look for a new job, because I gave them my thing and I waited, and there was nothing that they could do for me. But keep it based on your achievements, things you're doing, your current position, ways you're improving things, etc. And then some people had asked about working part-time versus full-time and trying to negotiate working less hours. Just say, look, I'm a high achiever. I would like to ask to work part-time and I still accomplish a lot. Can we work something out? Just ask. And so that's going to be really important. And then, so then the next question is I'm gonna have Blair answer this one first, is how would you negotiate a position within your department or unit that doesn't exist yet? For example, if there's the realignment, and what if the position is pretty unique? So I think, Blair, that's true for you, that your position was pretty unique. And then how do you figure out salary ranges when things are there? In some industries, there are some declines and budget cuts, etc. So yeah, what would you do to negotiate when position doesn't exist? I'll have Blair answer and then I'll have Kim answer.
Yeah, when the position doesn't exist, I think that's an example of when it's a little bit more nuanced and a little bit more difficult. This is I guess it depends whether the position is being created already and that's a foregone conclusion, or whether you're trying to advocate for the position to be created. I think those are a little bit different. Like if there's already a position and you're just negotiating the specifics of salary for that position, or if you're advocating for the position to be created. I think in either case, it requires probably a little bit more research on your part because presumably this position is going to be doing something that you have the skills for that might be a little bit unique. So doing research, both as far as the same as you would any time, but maybe a little bit extra research as far as what is fair and appropriate compensation for that new role. And then being really prepared to present that to the whoever the powers that be. In that conversation that I had with the COO, where I was one of the only ones really in my role at the company, she asked me for my resources, like for my sources, and she ended up structuring the pay scale for people like me based on what I told her. So I think it becomes even more important to do your research well. And also, like I said earlier, I think it becomes even more important to have people in your network who are doing jobs like the one that you're trying to create, both so that you can demonstrate the value of that position and also so that you have a better sense of salary. I also think I would apply all those same points to making sure that you really have thought through what that position is going to bring to the organization or the company, and what value it's going to bring, and your enthusiasm. I think that's an even more important time for enthusiasm as part of your ask. You know, if you're structuring the conversation like, hey, I'm really excited about this, it's going to enable us to do these other cool things, this is all the value, this is all the new stuff that's going to be brought by this. Then if you can put in there, like, this is an appropriate compensation, this is what I'm expecting, as part of that conversation, I think that's a lot more effective.
I think that covered most of what I probably would share the same. I've been in that situation twice, actually, where I felt where the work that I was doing did not match the title or the job description of what I had basically signed on to do, which is totally okay. I think that happens so frequently, and that really gives you a really strong bargaining chip. So yeah, going into it thinking, is this a position or a title change that I'm suggesting, or that already exists that I'm going for, in which case it would be a promotion. Either way, matching your skills to the need is really going to be the key. So, and I think Blair covered that perfectly.
That's great. Yeah, and definitely I second all of that. And then I really liked also what Blair shared about that it is an informational discussion, and sometimes employers will adjust their whole team. I did work with one woman engineer in the Bay Area, and she did such a good job and she was so scared, by the way. She was terrified of negotiating, but I gave her my spiel and I said, look, you have to negotiate. So she got a 15% increase. And then they told her that she educated them about what was fair, that they ended up actually redoing the pay structure in their entire company because they realized they were underpaying the rest of their staff. And it's a win for everybody in that case. So, and then someone had they said, for clarification, would speakers suggest not waiting on the annual review for salary increase and moving forward with negotiating whenever you're ready? Yes, that's correct. I would say, go ahead and ask. It's been 6 months, go ahead and ask. If it's a year, then just re-bring the conversation. I typically find for especially smaller companies, it can take 6 months or more to actually start the conversation and end it. Some companies are very fast, but a lot, if they're small, it'll take some time, or they have to ask higher up. So yeah, ask anytime. And then another person asked, they said, I am mid-career in a career trajectory where the salary is very generous, a software engineer. I value time more than money and would love to work part-time. And how do you negotiate that? And I think the thing too is, at what point do you negotiate things like hours and titles and things like cell phones, etc. I'll have Kim answer and then Blair, because I think that's a good topic to cover.
Sure, and I've done both. I think I've negotiated for title change and raise, different benefits and that sort of thing. I mean, it really depends on what your highest priority is, right? I mean, if the hours are the utmost, then that's what you should bring to the table first. And just having that open conversation, I think, is prioritizing what your needs what your needs are and what that conversation should look like based on that. So when you start off, Blair mentioned this earlier, but when you start a new job, you really should prioritize that number first and use other things as sort of like a bargaining chip. And things like, and that doesn't include start date, that doesn't include certain things like that. Those are a different conversation, but benefits that are quantifiable are kind of what to focus on. So I've never been in the position where I wanted to negotiate fewer hours though. So maybe Blair, do you have any good tips on that one?
I haven't done it. I've negotiated extra PTO. I've negotiated a work cell phone. I've negotiated a leave of absence, and I've negotiated salary. I had one experience where I tried to negotiate salary because that's what I've prioritized, because that's always been my first priority, and then wasn't able to. That was the first time that it happened to me. They said no, which can happen. But then it was after that I was able to, I kept kind of pushing a little bit. You don't want to push too much, but it's okay. I think Yuliya's general rule, correct me if I'm wrong, is like maybe once more, or you can revisit, like, or is this it? Like, and you can directly ask, like, is this, have we maxed out? You know, like, is this as far as you could go? But, you know, in that case, they had said no to salary. So then I brought out, like, okay, well, here's some other things and that I would like. And they actually said no to a lot of them, but I still got the cell phone out of it. And they actually, I think, could feel that I was not happy that they hadn't given me the other things. And so as like a last dish thing, they gave me a signing bonus, which is not as good as salary because it's one time, but it was, you know, money that I wouldn't have gotten otherwise, that just kind of came out at the last minute. So I think it really depends on your priorities, like Kim said. But I have a coworker actually who just started at my company and negotiated less hours, you know, and I think sometimes it seems like it's easier to do something like that if you have kids or like have something really tangible that you can point to as a reason, especially right now with the pandemic, that that's obvious, like, oh, you're caring for your children or an elderly family member or something like that. But this person didn't, and she was able to do it. You know, she had her own personal reasons that she needed to work fewer hours. So I think anything that you're trying to prioritize, number of hours or other like side benefits included, just depending on where it falls in your priority list, it seems like, you know, maybe just prioritizing what's most important to you first, and then having like it's almost like you need to rank your priorities and then do them in order of appearance. And then, you know, if there's things that are less important to you but would be kind of cool, have those like in your back pocket, but start with what's most important to you. And then I think that the same rules of negotiation apply regardless of what you're negotiating for.
Yeah, I totally agree with both Kim and Blair on that. And a quote that I actually have just up always in front of me is, "You get in life what you have the courage to ask for," by Oprah. And so if you do have those other things, then you do I think really do need to ask for them. And I agree with what Kim and Blair were saying. So the salary, because it is a stagnant thing, you want to ask for that first. And it is okay to ask one more time, say, hey, let's say they come back and they say we can't do it, or we can only do this much, say, hey, or have we maxed out? And then ask for other things. And there's a variety of things. And obviously nowadays, things like parking passes probably matter a little less to us than before, but there are a lot of things you can ask. And when it comes to hours too, definitely have the conversation, ask and say, hey, I can still do my work. What kind of hours can we do? One question that just came up is, the salary range for similar positions in my department is high, but mine is on the lower end. I didn't negotiate during the hiring process because I was hired for a part of a spouse program and didn't feel like they could negotiate. Their job description hasn't changed, and they don't do more than the description. However, it's on the lower end. Should I approach my supervisor? Yes. So it's a business conversation. It's a business conversation that you just have. You bring the position description, you bring your accomplishment, one-page summary, you find the average salary increases or the average salary for a position, say, hey, I'd like to ask for an increase. Here's what I should be making. Here's the average. Here's what I'm making, etc. The worst they're going to say is no, and that's okay. And then you can decide whether you want to stay or not. Which leads me to the next question, which is a very common one for salary negotiation. Salary negotiation is, how do you get over the fear of rejection? So have Blair and then Kim answer. How do you overcome that, especially in your own career and professional development?
It's hard. It's hard. I'm still working on it. I have Post-it notes on my monitor all the time with like little quotes that come up in my day-to-day life at work to make me feel more empowered and capable in my job. And so I think it's just practice and practice, like find mentors like Yuliya, or, you know, Kim or I, or whomever in your field, or people you trust in your personal life who you can have these practice conversations with. And I think for me, because of that fear and because it's uncomfortable and scary, that's why I like to get as much information as I can and come into that conversation with as much data as I can, so that I feel comfortable that I'm not asking for something that's off base or outlandish. Also for me, I think that those like little phrases are helpful when I'm practicing and like doing my ask. Like I mentioned earlier, you know, things like I'm doing my due diligence to make sure that I'm compensated well. That feels less scary to me and more just like I'm being a good professional. And then it starts to just feel like more of a task that is part of me doing my job well and advocate, you know, protecting myself, as opposed to, I think it can feel, for me especially, I think as a woman in our society, it can feel like I'm outstepping my societal role, or like I'm being too, like thinking too much of myself, or I'm like over embellishing my accomplishments, or like all of those negative voices. But I think it's just about trying to like steel myself with all of those resources, and then also having mentors and like guidance to come back to remind myself like, no, this is not even, it's necessary. It's a necessary part of the process, and we're just not taught to do it. And so like being able to come back to that and remind myself of that is helpful. But it really just, I think, practice.
Yeah, I completely agree, because the more it becomes, the more you say it out loud, the more natural it becomes. And I promise, after the first time, the second time, it just gets easier and easier and easier. And just like interviewing and really any of these uncomfortable, put yourself out there, holy cow, I feel super vulnerable conversations that you have with employers, it's just a matter of settling into that. And I promise it gets easier. I think the other thing to think about is that employers, for the most part, I'm sure there's some there, I mean, I know there's some that are not, are concerned with internal equity. So if you're in that space where you're asking for a raise in a job that you already have, and that kind of goes back to the question previously, is that it really is okay to ask. It's okay to be on the same level for the accomplishments, skills, and experience that you can bring to the table. And just being, like Blair said, doing the research and being confident in those numbers is super important, because it'll make that conversation a lot easier. So it's okay to ask. It really is. And I think early career, I was so hesitant, because I thought that they would think less of me if I asked this, you know, during a job offer, or they might, I was afraid that they would rescind the offer. Like I would lose out on this job if I asked for more money. You won't. It's okay. And if you do, I mean, geez, you avoided a huge bullet. So yeah, it's really okay. So that's what I would say, is just, and if you need a pep talk, Yuliya is so good at pep talks, and I really like, take advantage of your resources before that. Like it's, you have support.
Mm-hmm. Okay, all of that was so perfect from Blair and Kim. And yes, Kim knows me well. I do love to give a good pep talk, so literally call me and I will be here for you. And then I think the message that Blair and Kim just gave is to me so spot on in regards to negotiating. One of the questions is, what are tips for negotiating a current position when one is not willing or open to leaving the position? And given the current COVID economic situation, should this negotiation be postponed to when the ask can be more palatable? No, don't postpone. Go ahead and ask. And the tips that have already been given are really the things to follow, whether you're in a position or you're new to position. So find that average. You can ask for up to 20% above that average, give that one sheet summary, etc. And they may say no. They likely will say no, and that's okay. And then you can then ask again. And then at the annual review, you'll say, oh, we talked about this. How's it looking now? And just keep bringing it up. And it is okay. It is okay to ask. and you have our full permission to ask. And then I wanted to come back to something that Kim said that I actually thought was really brilliant, which is she was going to go into personal branding and then stopped herself. I actually think personal branding is a very important topic. So we're going to visit, okay, why personal branding? What is the big deal about personal branding? What is it even? We'll have Kim answer and then Blair.
Sure. So like I said, at a certain point, as much as a kind of a non-salesy person as I am, and I think a lot of people are, especially if you're uncomfortable asking these questions, is you have something that an employer wants, and you are not average. You are not, there's always going to be a unique skill set that you can bring to a company. And that is the value that you can really tie back to a number. So that personal branding, and I'm the job search and your career in general is as much soul searching as it is internet searching. I mean, it really is being grounded in who you are, your why, your purpose, and all of that ties into personal branding. And personal branding is how you communicate that to the external world. So you're taking what's inside and just really laying it out in the most marketable way you can, because that's really where you're going to see the most results. And being able to be confident in that is going to just arm you with so much confidence going into interviews, job searching, informational interviews, every step along the way, including salary negotiation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think of what Yuliya was talking about earlier with the one-page summary of your accomplishments. I think that applies. You can use that model to think of a few different things related to negotiation. So, and this is something that I feel like I need to work on, actually. But just keeping track of what you're doing in your job. If you're thinking about like going in for that salary adjustment or raise after you've already been at a company, keeping track of like what you've brought to the company in a way that is sort of quantitative and pared down. I think I work in consulting, so I work on all these different projects and I'm really busy all the time, and it can be easy to forget what you've done. But I think this is actually, like I said, something that have been meaning to do for myself, but like keeping a running list of like, these are all the things I brought to the company. These are the things I've done and contributed. And I think that then when you go to negotiate, then you have that list where you can like think of yourself as, something that is marketable or valuable to the company in that way. I also think of it in terms of just personal branding in general and related to salary negotiation. I think of it in terms of anytime you want to maybe like pivot or do something a little bit different. I have a technical Ph.D. in toxicology and am really interested in communication, like science communication, which is different than what my degree is in. But so that's something I've been working on for a while, is trying to like build up that resume so that I can do more of that type of work. But so I think that that's an example of branding too, where it's like, if you have some other interest or you think about pivoting, like how can which of my skills are transferable and to what, and how can I communicate those and package those in a way that I can use to get what I want. And in the case of negotiation, I think it's just like being able to point to the things you're already bringing, or if it's a new thing, the things that you want to bring and how they apply, so that you can translate those directly to like value for the organization or the company.
Yeah, fantastic advice. I love that. So we're gonna do, I'm gonna read off one question. I'll answer it really quickly, and then we'll do a summary of the key points and give Blair and Kim opportunity to just give what they think are the best piece of advice for salary negotiation. So this person's asking, one of the attendees is, what about applying for a job that is maybe out of your league, and how to have the confidence to go in and prove that you can learn how to do the job, even if you haven't done it before? I look at jobs that I'd love to have, but I feel like they're too big to apply for. So the answer is apply. The answer is yes. The answer is don't say no to yourself. And I can share my personal story too, because when I was applying for this job, so I've had this role for 4 years, I thought it was extremely intimidating. I was in my opinion, I was way underqualified. There was no way they were going to give me a chance, but I was like, no, I really want to do this. And I said, don't say no to yourself, Yuliya. And I was like, I have to do this. And I have loved it every day. And I could have said no. So going back to the Oprah quote, you get in life what you have the courage to ask for. And here's the interesting thing is, a lot of times it's females who say stuff like that. Men usually a lot of times will be like, I'm applying because it's a business thing and I'm going to apply. And it's not to say all men, but it's just the way we raise girls and the way we raise boys. So don't say no to yourself, apply. And if you want help with that job search, you can contact me. We'll do a consultation, we'll figure it out and go from there. So I'm going to now turn over first to Blair and then to Kim to do just a few minutes summary of key things you really want the audience to leave with remembering.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would just reiterate, truly 3 years ago, even a little over 3 years ago, I had not gotten a job really with my degree. I had spent all these years in school and I was at this like really low point of mental health and financially and everything. And that's when I came to Yuliya for help, thought I had done everything right, was really frustrated. And since then, from my first job offer 3.5 years ago till now, through negotiation, I have increased my salary like more than 50%. And that's been through like 4 negotiation conversations that I've had, like at the beginning of each position and then at points throughout those. And it's all using these techniques that we are talking about. And each one of those conversations has been horrifying and super uncomfortable. But that's mostly in the prep, honestly, like in the lead up. I get anxious and nervous and scared. It sounds scary. I feel inadequate. But those are things that like are part of how I was socialized in the society and are not actually related to me as a professional. And so I am on a journey to try to do more of that. And I've had, it's just been really eye-opening to me how much of an impact that has already had, using these simple tools and skills, how much of an impact that's already had on my career prospects, on my salary, all of those things. And so, yeah, don't say no to yourself and negotiate.
I can resonate with the word horrifying when you enter those conversations. They're tough. I have been in the situation so many times, just ready to hear no, just feeling so incredibly anxious to even ask the question. And in the end, I got a yes. And there's really nothing more exciting than getting a yes when you ask for something like that. So even if you just try it one time, just give it a try and see what happens. I think the being able to do the research and bring a confident case, I think is really the takeaway. And if this is nothing but a self-empowerment conversation about how to find it within yourself to give yourself the credit to go ahead and just give it a try, great. I think that's the takeaway. If you're at the point of salary negotiation, that means that you have already been through quite a bit on your job search journey. So give yourself that credit, give yourself that permission, and use your resources. Like I probably have said it a million times and I will continue to say it, but you have people out there that are rooting for you and are happy to help. And sometimes that's your employer. A lot of times that's your employer. So just believe that and access those resources early and often. And we're here for you.
That's awesome. That was all so well said that I have nothing additional to add because Blair and Kim did such a good job just tying it all together. I'm here for you. I will help advocate on your behalf. A lot of this stuff is scary and you have resources available to you. So we're going to just do a quick wrap up and we'll show the next slide, which is the next webcast, which is going to be on workplace culture changes, how to lead and adapt. And I will say this, one of the ways you can bump your salary is to prove that you can navigate cultural change in the workplace and lead and adapt through it. And then you can just use those resources or those things in your summary and your bullet points. And the 2 speakers are going to be presenting. They're really awesome. And I think a lot of that information can ultimately help you get a promotion, help you get a higher salary, etc. So for those of you who are interested in professional growth, I highly recommend this webcast that's coming up on November 18th. So I'll send a summary later with the recording link, with the conversation templates, with some takeaways, etc. I want to say huge thank you to Blair and Kim for helping navigate through this challenging topic today. So thank you both for sharing your expertise. And then we do have an administrative assistant, Mary, who's helping us. A huge thank you to Mary for helping all of us here behind the scenes. And to all the attendees, reach out anytime, and we're always glad to help you. Thank you.